Good morning. How are y'all? Good morning. How's everyone doing?
Good. Good morning.
We'll give everybody a few minutes to join us before we dive in for the day. And I'll get my screen set up here. While we give everyone a few minutes, do you have any questions for me right now? Anything that's come up?
My only question is, I'm not sure if I would say it in during this meeting, but I was trying to see when would I get the actual live calls.
So once you've reached your 30-day mark and you've finished your mock call, which I think you have. Have you finished your mock calls?
Yes, I did, and I also reached the 30 days.
Okay, so let's see.
Okay.
Remind me, Prella, which location are you?
Turkey Lake, Orlando, Turkey Lake.
Okay. Yeah, you should be turned on. So I know Angel is going to be calling all of our Orlando area agents to touch base. So mention it to him as well this week when you talk to him. But I'm going to send Dana a message right now
Okay.
and see what the status is. If there's something else they're waiting on that I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, anytime you have any questions, I'm always happy to help. I may not have
Okay.
the answer for you, but let me reach out to them and I can check in.
Thank you.
Hmm. Let me finish sending that so I don't forget. Okay. So, what I want to talk about today is going over what the buyer broker agreement and showing agreements look like, reminders of when we need them, and then when it comes to writing your offers, how we handle the compensation documents. So I've had a lot of contracts come through in the last week or two from newer agents that we had to do edits on the compensation. So I think it's always good to revisit that. Um, so let me share my screen with you and we will dive in. Okay, so my weekly reminder that if you don't have agent resources already bookmarked, that will be very helpful and beneficial for you. I recommend bookmarking it along with our Google Forms that we use to submit info over to admin. You can also star it so it's easy to access when you log into Google Drive, because I know when you log into Google Drive, sometimes it can be hard to navigate. So the first document we're going to look at is our buyer showing agreement. So Zillow will send a touring agreement out on your behalf if you have that turned on. Show of hands, does everyone have that turned on, or would you like to know how to do that? Everybody that has Zillow, we're good. Jeff's been with us for a little while now. Okay. Okay, so this document is what's going to be sent out from Zillow to your buyer when you schedule a showing. Keep in mind, if it's not scheduled if it's not a real-time touring, that Zillow gets that showing information, they're not going to send this, and they won't send this if you don't already have that setting turned on. So this is just a way to help us get our foot in the door, but it is only good for 7 days. So once you've built your relationship with your buyer, you've identified that you're going to continue showing them homes, you will want to remember to make sure you have an additional showing agreement that is for a longer time frame. So in our, give me a second, back in Agent Resources, we have blank ones for you that you can use as an example or go in and print if you need to. You can always print them from DocuSign, and then we recommend you keeping them in your car, because if you have a last minute showing or a buyer doesn't sign electronically, then you're still responsible for getting that document. So whichever showing agreement you use, it's still your responsibility before a door is open to get it. And then once you have that new client, you will go into, I wanted you to see what it looks like. In Agent Resources, if you don't have all of the links to our admin Google Form saved, there's this document called 4 to 5 Google Forms, Required Forms and Instructions. And it gives you a breakdown of when we need everything, when each form is used. So when you first get that signed touring agreement, EBBA, whichever document it is, we need you to submit the new showing agreement submission. This helps admins save it for compliance, because if we are ever audited, if the main office doesn't have it, then it's going to fall back on you, and you can be responsible for needing that document or having to show proof for that document, and you can be fined if you don't have it. So it's really important that you get it over to admin so they can put it on file with KW, and it will be there forever. And keep in mind that this is any showing agreement, even if you don't end up selling a house with these people. So that's why it's a good idea to, once you get it signed, go ahead and submit this within those first 24 hours. So once you are under contract or negotiating a contract, the other element of commissions that we need to discuss is that it can be a tricky conversation. I'm just going to show you this section. It can be a tricky conversation. The seller agent usually doesn't provide what the seller's willing to pay. They're going to tell you as the buyer's agent, oh, it's negotiable. It's going to depend on your offer. And that's very typical. With your buyer, they've already agreed that to acknowledge that, yes, you should get paid for your work one way or the other. But we know a lot of times the buyer doesn't have the funds to pay for that out of pocket. So 9 times out of 10, we're going to be asking the seller to pay our buyer's brokerage And when you're explaining it and getting to know your buyer in those early on discussions, that's exactly what you'll say is, I legally need this on file to be able to open any doors for you. And it also acknowledges what my commission should be. Now, keep in mind, we'll only look at houses and work with sellers who are willing to pay my commission. It may be that the buyer wants a really good discount, a really discounted price, and the home's been on the market for a while. Whatever the scenario is, for some reason, you may negotiate that the seller pays you a very small commission, and then you would ask your buyer to pay the difference. That does happen sometimes, depending on the scenario. A lot more, that's probably more often with cash buyers than it would be for financing, because financing buyers usually have a strict or a limited pool of funds to use for their closing costs and down payment. But so you keep in mind, you tell the buyer, hey, we're only going to look at houses that the seller's going to be willing to pay me on. That way it's not an issue. You don't fall in love with a house that we can't make work financially. And then my recommendation is, before you schedule a showing, definitely before you write a contract, you always want to contact the listing agent. Ask them what the seller's offering, ask them specifics about the house, get to know what the seller needs so you can write the strongest offer. But you're going to reach out to the listing agent and make sure that they are willing to pay something. So in the event that what the seller is willing to pay and what ends up being negotiated so you can get your buyer their dream house doesn't match what's in your original EBBA, you will do a modification document. So just keep in mind that as you're going through the contract process, as I'm reviewing your documents, I may say, hey, these commissions don't match. We need to do a modification document to show who's paying what. And you don't want to modify your entire original EBBA, because it's usually a blanket document that can be used for any type of property. And if for some reason this deal falls through, we're going to revert back to that EBBA and continue looking at homes. So we don't want to lock ourselves into lowering our commission right off the bat in the event we look at other homes. So we do a modification and make it specific to that purchase. Sorry, my phone's distracting me over here. We make it specific to that property address, to that purchase. And then this is how we legally document that commission change. So on your EBBA, you cannot receive, just a couple reminders. I wanted to get it back in front of us again. You can't be paid more than what is in your showing agreement or your EBBA. So say you were originally looking at as-is homes or whatever it might be, and then you move to a new construction and that builder is offering a bonus to any agent who closes or gets under contract this month. So in that event, you would also do a modification to make sure that you're capturing, your buyer technically has to okay you receiving that higher amount. So there's multiple reasons when a modification would be used. Just remember that the amount on the showing agreement or the buyer broker agreement has to match what you're getting paid at the closing table. So sometimes, I was mentioning earlier, it may be a combination that the seller may say, I'm only paying 2%. And your buyer says, okay, I want this house. I can pay an additional 0.5% or the additional 1% to make up your difference in commission. And so in that event, you would use this example where it just says specific to the purchase of, this property, because again, we don't want to completely override our original document, broker will receive 2% of purchase price from the seller, seller's broker, whichever one it might be, and then the 0.5% or 1% of purchase price from the consumer. This document references our buyer as a consumer, so that's why it's written that way. I want you guys to be familiar with that, so when the time comes that you're writing contracts and negotiating offers, that you can be comfortable in discussing it with your buyers. Another element of it is when you get to that contract part, we're going to pull up a contract, and we don't want to write an offer. Oh, I went to the wrong place. So I went to document examples contracts. I'm going to show you an example contract. So when you sit down to write, you can pull this up, whether it's your first contract or your 21st offer you're ever working on. You can pull this up to use as a cheat sheet for what sections we do need something. But in this, we're going to scroll down to section 19 for the sake of the conversation today. So section 19, addenda and additional terms. This says the following additional terms are included in the attached addenda or riders, basically anything you're emailing over with that as is contract, which is this, and it's going to become a part of the contract. So that means if something is checked here or filled in other, then unless it is completely executed, meaning signed by the buyer, signed by the seller, and returned to all parties, unless this additional document or documents is fully executed, your offer contract is not executed. So that's why it's really important to protect your buyer. Make sure that you are checking this. Now, if it came down to it, if the buyer and seller both signed an additional document, say they both signed the HOA document, but it wasn't a part of this contract, yes, for closing purposes, that's still going to be acknowledged that they both agree to that information. However, if something popped up during the approval process with the HOA that was not indicated on that original HOA document, your buyer could cancel because the terms were changing from what they originally agreed to, because it was a part of their original purchase contract. So it is important to make any additional riders or documents that your buyer has to sign a part of the contract. Back to our compensation discussion. One thing that with any residential property that is a newer rule in the last 2 years, we cannot put any commission language, compensation language in the contract. It seems silly because that's a big part of the negotiations. However, you can't write in additional terms, contract is contingent on buyer broker being paid, or buyer broker commission is 2%. You cannot put it in the contract. And again, we can get fined if we do. The workaround for that is there's 2 documents that allow us to make this contract contingent on getting paid. The first one I'll show you is the FF rider. So I don't have it checked here in this example because it's either or. You would use the FF rider or you would use the GG document and a compensation agreement. But the first one I'll show you is the FF rider because we've learned it's just simpler. The less contract docs we have to create, the easier life is. Now, that said, not all listing agents are familiar with this document. And so if they're not familiar with it, it can make them nervous. They don't know how to adequately explain it to their seller, and they may prefer using the other option. But for our writing offer purposes, this is typically the simplest, because not only is it in section 19, so we can make your offer contingent on this document being signed, it also goes ahead and puts what you're going to be paid, what your commission is, right in the document. So then there's a box that says the balance of the credit will be paid by seller directly to buyer broker. Now, this was written in there when it was still a gray area on how lenders were going to consider commissions. The lender does not include, so most loans have, well, all loans have a cap as to how much outside funds or gift funds the buyer can receive, or how much of a credit the buyer can receive from the seller to go towards their purchase. A good rule of thumb, I don't want to dive into that yet. I'm going to make a note to circle back and pull up that mortgage info for you. But anyway, so this was drafted as a safety net when we weren't sure how the lenders were going to view those funds. So the good thing is I've never had this come into play, but for the sake of filling it out as safe as possible for your buyer, so they don't have to owe you something legally at the end when we know they don't have the money, you check this box. So in your contract, do I still have it open? Nope. Oh, here it is. Okay, so in your contract, you filled out everything else. You're going to check everything here that applies. And in this one scenario, we're checking the FF. And then you're going to go over in DocuSign or Transaction Desk, pull that document up and draft it as well. And this serves as your compensation agreement. Now, if for whatever reason, the listing agent says, I don't want to use that FF writer, you have a couple options. You can either, I'm going to go into DocuSign so you can see it in action. Give me just a second. If the contract is already signed by everyone and you're not creating a new draft, oh, good gracious. I personally, when I work on deals, I use Transaction Desk, but I know most of you use DocuSign, so that's where I'm going to go in. Switch to rooms. Okay, so I have a test folder in here just so I can work on blank docs. So I don't have an FF writer in here. So I will go to add DocuSign rooms. It may come up. Nope. Sometimes if you can't find what you're looking for, just change your library. It's right here. That's the one we want. Okay. So say I submitted the offer. I checked the right boxes. I filled in my FF writer, but the listing agent says, I already have a compensation agreement. I don't want to use the FF writer. Or they may say, I don't know what this is. Just go ahead and sign my compensation agreement. That's fine. But remember, in your as-is contract, you have to remove. You'll have to put a line through it and remove it if everyone's already signed, which can be a pain in the butt because it gets kind of sloppy, but I'm going to show you how to do that quickly. So you would, if you're making edits that need to be initialed, then you do it when you're in your signing function. Excuse me, hiccups. So we're going to scroll down. Okay, say the original offer had FF writer checked, and now everyone says we're not using that document, but we're not drafting a new document. Then you would have that final version that everyone signed, and you can draw a line. It's not letting me. Here we go. Thought I was losing my mind. So these are the typical, hopefully everybody can see my screen well. In DocuSign, these are the typical fields that you may drag and drop something. For additional information or additional tools, I should say, you click that pre-fill tools button, and then you simply just drop a line over it. Now, keep in mind, any changes would have to be initialed by both buyer and seller. So then you'd send it to your buyer. Once they initial, send it back to the seller. Also, if you do not have a executed compensation agreement already, say one exists, but it's not executed, we want to make sure that this offer that you're drafting is contingent on that compensation agreement being executed. And so that's where the GG writer comes in. Some sellers or listing agents are just more comfortable with a compensation agreement than the FF writer. It's getting less and less common, which is good because it means, again, less paperwork for us. So if they want this document, that's fine. It means we want the GG writer because it says, here we go. It says this contract is contingent upon whichever documents being used, seller's broker and buyer's broker, or seller and buyer's broker executing a compensation agreement within blank days. It defaults to 3 days. So without using this, your offer that you're sending is not contingent on your compensation agreement being executed. Does that make sense? I feel like it's always a nuance or that it's kind of silly the way that we're required to handle it, but does anyone have questions with that? Do you understand the difference between the two? Because a lot of agents, when they sit down to write contracts, or when the listing agent starts sending documents, sometimes it's harder to explain. Thumbs up if everyone's good on the differences between the FF writer and the GG writer. Okay, perfect. So as a listing agent, when that time comes, honestly, I don't care if that offer is contingent on the buyer's broker compensation agreement because my priorities are my seller's needs. But as a buyer's agent, you always want one or the other. Oh, where is it? You're going to want one or the other checked. And that's what those documents look like. That's how you use them and when you use them. And then once you've gone through negotiations, just remember if the final compensation you're receiving is different, then you do need an EBBA modification to outline that. And any buyer broker agreement, showing agreements, that is just between you and the buyer. You don't include them when you submit offers or contract docs to the listing side. It's just for us and Keller Williams. So that's what you submit to the office and save on file. Since we are in DocuSign and we are in a contract, we'll go through some of the highlights for some of our very new agents. Before I move on, are there any questions? No questions. Either you guys already knew this, I did a great job explaining it, or you're thinking, Caitlin, what are you talking about? So I'm gonna like to think that you guys know it and we're good to go. Just some highlights since we're in the as-is contract. When you are writing it in Florida, as is what's commonly used. I have never seen or used the other version of a contract in my 10 years of real estate. So it's always the as is. You can explain to your buyer in those early conversations as you're getting to know them that when you get to the offer process, it is contingent on their offer will be contingent on a satisfactory inspection. And our inspection window starts as soon as we'll scroll down to the inspection section. It starts as soon as we're executed, is day 0. The next day is day 1. And it's really important because buyers don't always understand that they have to respond to you within that window of time if they do have concerns, or, oh, they decided to go on vacation and you can't get them on the phone. So you want to make sure that they're aware that this time frame is super important, because if we decide that we have issues or concerns and they want to cancel because of something they found during the inspection period, after that, in this case, it was a 7-day window, then they are not entitled to their escrow deposit. The seller would have the right to keep the escrow deposit. So it's important that they understand that. So for whatever reason, this contract negotiated a 7-day inspection period. I always recommend shoot for 10 days to give yourself plenty of wiggle room. If the inspector's busy, if you end up needing to send an additional vendor out. So say the inspector has concerns or notices a leak and you want to send a plumber out for additional information. 10 days usually gives us enough time. 7 days is doable. Usually with a good inspector, they're booked out at least a week in advance. So if I know I'm writing that offer, I'm going to go ahead and call Inspection Solutions. They handle most of Central Florida, and say, hey, can you pencil me in? That way I know that if we get this under contract in 2 days, I'm not up the creek next week when I'm trying otherwise waiting to call on Monday. Anyway, less than 7 days can be difficult. Again, call the inspector. But for your buyer's sake and for your peace of mind, shoot for 10 days. Sometimes you'll see that it may be a multiple offer scenario and the seller is going to be really stringent on the times because they want to know that they're not wasting time off the market. So they may insist on a 5-day or a 7-day. If that's the case, just make sure your buyer's aware that you have to be very cognizant and on top of making those decisions and communicating with the seller side. So if you go through your inspection window and you do have requests, remember that they have to be sent over by the end of the inspection, and a decision has to be executed. So if you send requests over, the buyer and seller both have to sign it, has to be executed, acknowledging that you've come to terms. Now, if it's the end of your inspection and you're not hearing back from the seller, there may be an instance where you send the request, but you also send a cancellation document, and that is a CYA to cover your hiney if for some reason the seller doesn't agree to whatever the inspection requests are, or it takes a week to get a response and then he still says no, your buyer's escrow payment is saved because and by saved, I mean they're entitled to get it back if the deal falls apart. So those are good things to keep in mind. And the more information you can prepare your buyer to expect in those early conversations really lays the groundwork for how smooth a transaction can go. And it may be that you have roadblocks every step of the way. Title company may not send the wiring instructions timely, or the inspection may come back awful, or the lender needs more documents. Everything can go wrong, but if you are preparing your buyer what to expect and educating them through the process and what to expect, they're not going to, most people aren't going to get disgruntled and just say, oh, this is a horrible deal and blame you. Now, if they don't really understand what's happening, then it's really easy just to blame the realtor and fire you and move on to a new realtor. So I don't say that to scare you. It's just as problems arise, if they don't understand, usually they're going to look to you because you're the professional. You're supposed to be the one in the know. So those are my thoughts on the FF and the GG rider, how to discuss those with your buyers, how to use them when you're writing an offer, and then keep in mind that your compensation commission amount that you're getting in a deal has to match your EBBA. So if it doesn't, we do a modification. And then keep in mind with your contracts as you're talking to them, really explaining the inspection period before your offer is executed is helpful. That way everybody's on the same page. Now, you may have a buyer who wants to use their own inspector. That's fine. Just remember that the buyer can't be at the property by themselves. And so if a buyer has an inspection company that they prefer or trust, or they want to know that it's going to be unbiased, whatever it might be, you just say, okay, great. Give me their contact information. I will schedule it. They'll reach out to you for payment. And then I was going to show you section 19 again, since we're in here. Just remember that this section is important. Whether there's an HOA or it's specific to what type of financing your buyer has, you will always select one of these. Everything else could be blank, but you will always have one of these because we want every offer being contingent on us being paid, and that so you are protected. What questions? We have about 20 minutes, so I don't want to dive into another section of the contract or another topic necessarily. So what questions do you guys have for me?
What section, this is one of my questions for you on the offer I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
In the as is, if I'm asking for some concession from the seller at the end, so I want $4,000 back for helping the buyers, right?
Mm-hmm.
What section would that be in?
Okay. I'm going to get out of here. Give me just a second so I can show you. So seller concessions, and I'm glad that was your question because I was going to show you my info that I have on that. I forgot already. Uh-oh.
Good segue.
No, sorry. Okay, I'm back in. Oh, good gracious. Okay. No. We're going to start with a blank document. Bear with me. All right, so we're writing an offer and our buyer needs concessions, which means that's for our new agents. The seller can contribute funds to their closing costs and prepaids amount. Why can't I find So the way you write it is, dun, da, da, da. There's a section of the contract that specifically outlines what closing costs the buyer has and what closing costs the seller has. So if you're needing something outside the standard, what you would do, cost to be paid by sellers. In other, you would put see section 20 additional terms. And then in those additional terms, you're going to outline exactly what you're needing from the seller. So you'd say seller to contribute. You can have a percentage. It could be a percentage of purchase price towards buyers' closing costs and prepaids. Or it could be a flat amount. If that's following my cursor, that's annoying. Or it could just be a flat amount. Now, you always want to include prepaids because so your closing costs are, as a buyer, typically your lender fees, your doc stamps, title related fees, but prepaids are the upfront amount that they have to pay into an escrow account for insurance, for homeowners insurance, and then a prepaid amount that they put in an account the lender requires for their property taxes. So if you just put closing costs, it may not cover everything they're needing. If it's a flat amount, if their closing costs were only $3,000, if you don't have and prepaids in here, that additional $1,000 can't be contributed to it. Another thing to keep in mind about it is, and this is what I wanted to show you, different loan types have different thresholds for how much a buyer can receive from a seller. So in our work, I think this is where I have it saved for you guys. In our working with buyers folder, I have a loan type fact sheet. So, oh, sugar. Okay. Trying to make it big. I know it's small on your screen. So if it's a conventional loan and they are putting down a pretty standard amount. So a conventional loan, if it's a first-time home buyer, that down payment requirement will be 3%. If it is not a first-time home buyer, then the conventional down payment is requirement minimum is 5%. So that info is right here. If they're putting down that minimum, so anything under 10%, they're only allowed to accept up to 3% of the purchase price from the seller. If for some reason your buyer is able to put more down, the more they put down, there's higher amounts that they are able to accept from the seller. So just keep that in mind. Conventional rule of thumb is they can only take 3% of purchase price. So that means they're most likely going to have some extra cash on hand to pay the rest of their closing costs. Closing costs and prepaids are typically about 4%. It's going to depend on the lender though. Now with an FHA loan, oh, my page is split. The seller can contribute up to 6% of the purchase price, which is great because that should cover all of the seller's concessions and prepaids. If they're paying more than that, you probably need a new lender because the lender's probably has an astronomical origination fee or something. But so conventional, they can take up to 3%. FHA, they can receive from the seller up to 6%. USDA, it's the same thing, up to 6%. And VA, it's the same. There's basically no cap as to what they can accept. 6% though, again, would more than cover all of the closing costs. So in the contract, you may write seller to contribute, we'll change it back, up to 6% of purchase price towards buyer's closing costs and prepaids. Well, when you send your offer over, the listing agent may call you and say, hey, the seller needs to know exactly what that's going to be. If that question comes up, then you can call the lender, or shoot them an email and say, hey, I need a loan estimate for this property address, this purchase price. Can you get that over to me? Because that loan estimate is going to show you, and let's see if I can find one quickly for you. I would love to find one easy for you. I should have an example saved for these conversations. All of my junk. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time.
Gosh, that's my email from last night sending me my doc.
What's that?
That's my email from last night sending me my doc to read. That's not junk.
I haven't had time to look yet, but I'm going to look after today's meeting.
No worries. Okay.
You're first on my list. And you don't have a loan estimate in there, so it doesn't help this conversation. But you can ask the lender, you give them the property address. They'll usually pull up the property taxes. You can be helpful, go ahead and provide it too, and give them the purchase price. They will give you a loan estimate, and then you'll be able to say, okay, seller, it's going to be $5,820, or, it's going to be $8,500. So the seller a lot of times will want a flat amount because they don't want to leave it open to, they don't want it to be such a flexible amount. If you're saying up to, or sometimes you may just say 6% of purchase price. They may want it to be a flat amount. They may not be happy with contributing that full 6% because they don't want to have to be obligated to contribute more than what that loan estimate says. So that goes along with when I'm getting ready to write an offer. 9 times out of 10, I've already talked to the lender. When you get a new buyer, it's easier in the process. If you get a new buyer, either you're helping them get pre-approved or they come to you with a pre-approval. You call the lender and say, okay, what do I need to know about this deal? You want to know their loan type. You want to know how much cash on hand they have, if you're going to have to ask for seller credits. And then as you are narrowing down houses, sometimes that loan estimate is what it takes to help your buyer make the decision. Okay, yes, I can afford this house. I want to make an offer. So the loan estimates can be really helpful. And the more conversation you're having with the lender up front, it's going to be easier to navigate the offer situation in those negotiations. So in the working with buyers is where I have that loan type facts sheet. In time, you're going to know this information by heart, but in the beginning, when you're new to real estate, you can have this as, a go-to when you're trying to remember specifics. Sometimes when you're talking to a buyer and they haven't worked on getting pre-approved, and if they're comfortable, I'll say the conversation may look like, okay, so the first step in buying a home is to get your pre-approval. That tells us a lot about what type of home we need to be looking at, what our budget is, lets you know what your estimate for your monthly payment. Have you talked to a lender? And they'll say, no, I didn't know who to call, or I don't know if my credit's good enough. You can say, okay, well, do you mind me asking what your credit score is? That's usually what I say. Do you mind me asking what your credit score is? They may not know a firm number, but they may know an amount. They may say, oh, I know it's only 600. And you say, okay, well, there are loan types that have a minimum credit score of 580. So it's definitely worth you talking to the lender to see what your options are. So lenders look at credit score and they look at debt to income ratio, which means how much debt do you have versus how much money you have incoming. And then that's the perfect segue. Okay, well, I'm going to have Eric or Cherry Ann over at Zillow Home Loans. I usually just reference them by names. I don't necessarily say the lender. I'll have Eric get with you and he'll see what your options are. And then we'll go from there. Because as a buyer's agent, you don't want to be showing properties to someone who is not going to be ready to buy anytime soon. That's not a good use of your time. But also, they may think they're more qualified, or they may think they want a conventional loan, but it turns out an FHA loan is going to be the better fit for them. Well, if that's the case, you need to eliminate homes that can't be financed FHA because they have a little stricter parameters. So that's information you're going to want to know up front. More content on that is in this working with buyers folder. If it is, I've referenced this, I think 2 weeks ago, we have the guide to home ownership. So you can send this to them. You can skim it to give yourself, a fresh idea of talking points when you're going to meet new buyers. That first showing, I like to say you treat it like a first date. You're getting to know them. They're getting to know you. We always want to at least meet them once, and then it's going to get us pointed in the right direction of, okay, are they a client who's ready to buy this month? Are they a client who's ready to buy in 3 months and I need to plan for that? Or are they not going to be ready this year, but I'm going to get them in touch with a lender who can help them with guidance on repairing their credit, and then put them on a nurture in our follow-up boss in our client management system. And then every 3 months, check in with them. And then in a year from now, they're going to be ready to buy and I'm going to be ready to call them. Not every lead we take is going to be someone who can buy a house right now, but the way you build your long-term real estate career is nurturing those relationships and building those relationships, because you're going to want a closing this month, just like next month, and just like you will from a year from now. So always chasing that next lead makes it really difficult to grow your business. It's a big part of what we do is nurturing those relationships we're making along the way. So again, this home buyer guide is good for your buyers, but also good for your newer agents. When I created this, I dropped in Andrea at Ridgeview. She's local here to Lake Wales. They can write loans anywhere. They're wonderful. We, of course, have a relationship with Zillow Home Loans. So with our Zillow leads, there's an algorithm. They want us to send clients back to Zillow Home Loans. But they can't do all types of loans. They can't do mobile homes. It may be someone who they're real close, but they don't fit Zillow's cookie cutter mold of the perfect buyer. So a lot of times it's worth getting a second opinion, and Ridgeview is who I would definitely recommend with that. They're wonderful to work with. And basically, if they can't approve somebody, then you truly know that they're not able to purchase right now. But again, that lender will maintain the relationship. You maintain the relationship. So down the road, when they are ready, you're the one they call. And in the meantime, they may be sending their aunt or friend or neighbor because you took the time to build a relationship and help them through the process. So I'm just going to show you Oh, I have too many tabs open. In the working with buyers, we'll get out of the buyer guide. I do have Zillow Home Loan. Let's see. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's not in there. We have a Zillow Home Loans folder in the main agent resources, and there's a handout for all of our main lenders. I'll show you an example of one. So you can send this to your buyers if they're the type of people who want stuff emailed to them. It's good for you to keep on hand. And then there's a couple handouts about having those conversations with your buyers. So that's a good resource as well. It is 10:56, so I will wrap up my conversation for the day, but I'll stay on for as long as you guys have questions. Do we have any other questions today about covered or something else you're working on? Sarah?
Yeah, so I was in the lead pool, and I found someone that's like interested in the 55 plus communities. Is there a way to search for that in the MLS?
There sure is. So I don't know. I am struggling over here today. Okay. So if you have someone that they're specific, they only want a mobile home or they only want 55 and up, whatever it might be. Oh, come on. There is in additional fields you can add or remove. If you don't find the field up here in the typical search criteria, you can add or remove it. So that's something I've added before. Housing for older persons, yes or no. That's what the category for 55 and up is called. And then it will eliminate anything that's not. So say we wanted to do a search in Clearmont of 55 and up. There's 130 matches. So you may narrow it down to they only want a mobile home community, 42. And then you keep narrowing it down as you go. But yes, so that is how you do that. And then if you want to see your results.
Okay, and then with the mobile homes, are we allowed to sell those? Because I saw like in the lead pool, there were people saying that like we can't sell those unless they own the land.
Correct. So if you come across something that is, so this says it real big, no lot rent, you own the land. So real estate is the land and anything attached to it. So we're not licensed to do mobile home sales if it is on a leased lot. That is basically like you're selling a trailer or a truck. You have to have a specific license to be able to sell just a mobile home. That is not us. So if it is in a community where they own the lot, whether it's a share of the land, you'll come across co-ops where they don't necessarily own the parcel they're on, they own a share. You can do that. So basically, if the mobile home is on owned land, one way or the other, you can sell it. If it's just a trailer that is paying a monthly rental fee to sit on that piece of property, then that is not us.
Okay, and you said we can do co-ops?
Yes, you can do co-ops because that means it's the owners are a cooperative. They all own a share of the land in there.
Okay, and then with those, are those typically like a lower HOA fee?
Sometimes, not always. So a lot of times it really just depends on the community because it's going to depend on how much they include. Some include utilities, lawn maintenance, and then all of the amenities like the pool or shuffleboard. And those might be higher monthly rates. And then if there are less, community provided amenities or services, it'll be a cheaper HOA. So it really just depends on what the HOA provides. When you're looking at properties, you can see what the average monthly cost is. So that's helpful. You can do a search if you know someone, say they can't do more than $200 a month. In your additional fields in your MLS search, you can narrow it down. And I'm trying to see what that field is. Monthly HOA amount. You can narrow it down to eliminate properties that have really high HOAs. The more parameters you put on your search, the more that could go wrong, and it may filter out a property that a listing agent input something wrong. So be careful when you are doing really specific searches. You want to make sure you're not eliminating a property that might actually work for you, or for your buyer, I should say. But yep, you can narrow it all down in your additional fields.
Okay.
One thing to keep in mind, if it is a co-op, if it's a community co-op, not all lenders can or will finance properties in there because there's higher risk. So sometimes there's limited lenders for co-op properties. And if you come across that, just let me know and I can help you navigate it. But if you have someone that comes to you with a pre-approval and it's not a lender that you're already familiar working with, if they're looking at co-op type mobile home properties, go ahead and ask your lender up front, hey, are you able to do these types of properties? Because it may be that you eliminate those from your search or your buyer gets another loan approval.
Okay.
Do we have
Question.
Hey.
Hey, I was trying to see why I was speaking with another agent, but she was looking on Zillow for homes. So is some homes listed on Zillow but not MLS?
So our MLS is specific to certain regions. We're not in Stellar MLS, we're not going to be able to see all of Florida. So say it was a Miami agent, they have a different MLS than us. If they listed a home in Winter Haven, which is where my office is, if they listed a home in Winter Haven but put it in their Miami MLS, we won't be able to see it, but it would still be pushed publicly to all the public websites. If you get a call and someone gives you an address and you can't find it in MLS, a lot of times it's because the listing agent is from a different area. What you can do is, I always go the wrong thing. MLS Advantage is by Florida Realtors, and it gives you access to the entire state's listings. It's clunkier to navigate, but you can always use this to search for properties that are listed outside of our MLS. Now, if someone gives you an address and you still can't find them, I'll do a Google search for the address, see what I can come up with. And sometimes it may be that it's a lot lease property and that's why it's not coming up on our end, or it may be that something's weird in their listing and it's not populating properly in MLS. So what I would do, let me think. Say someone wanted to see my listing in Eagle Lake and you can't find, for whatever reason, you can't find it. I may go in and scroll through to see the listing number or the MLS number and then search by that. Because every once in a while, your searches may just be funky. But if you have a listing agent who, again, is not in your area, that may be why you can't find it in MLS.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And now if it's a realtor who is only using Zillow, it tells me that they're probably not very experienced. because using MLS to get all of our information is a big part of how we provide value. The general public doesn't have access to that. So there's a lot of information a realtor's not going to have if they're not utilizing that. So that seems odd, but what other questions do y'all have? Well, I hope this was helpful. If anything comes up, let me know. Jeff, I am going to review your offer documents, or whatever it is that you sent me in just a few minutes. I will let you know. I'll shoot you an email if I have any edits. And then you guys, if anything comes up with while you're talking to buyers, during showings, you're ready to start writing an offer, whatever it might be, just give me a call and I'm happy to help. Hey, Sarah.
Sorry, I had another question. In the MLS, how do you like search for like homes that like within I'm trying to like gather up communities, the 55 plus communities within like a certain budget. So and this person's not looking to buy like right now, they're looking like 6 to 9 months out. But I'm trying to find those communities that they could afford. So how would I search for things that like aren't on the market?
Well, you can't necessarily search for something that's not on the market, but if you're looking, what you could do is, if you're wanting to get an idea for what those properties are, you could look for sold, active, and pending, and then narrow it down to HOA or 55 and up, and then whatever their budget is. Say they want to stay under 200. It's still a ton because we haven't narrowed it down to location, but if they want just the general Orlando area. So we have 11 homes. Let's take a look at our results. That most are active. We have had a couple sales, but this gives you a handful of communities that you can give them as examples. So what I would do for them is set them up on maybe a weekly email of all the active listings in Orlando under 200 that is a 55 and up. And then right now there's currently 9 available, but if you save, you can save the search so you can go back in MLS and quickly find it, but then you can do an auto email and you can tell it how frequently you want them to receive it or when you want them to receive it. If they're not someone who's wanting to buy within the next month or two, I would recommend just a weekly email or even a daily email, because 55 and up, there aren't a ton of properties. So at first they're going to receive that first initial list of 9. And then anything that hits the market after these, they'll get an email alert with that new listing. So it's not just sending them the same ones over and over again. It sends them this, and then periodically when something new meets those parameters, it's going to send them an email.
Okay.
So they can get a feel for the different communities.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
Good deal. That's a really good question, because it can be hard. It can be hard, narrowing down your searches sometimes, whether it's too broad or too specific. But that's what I would do. So then they can get a feel for it. So when they are ready to start truly looking, they can tell you, oh, we don't like this neighborhood, or, oh, we've really liked this community. Because one side note with 55 and up neighborhoods, a lot of times they have a lot of for sale by owner. So if they've narrowed in on 2 communities, it may be worthwhile to drive through and collect all the for sale by owner info as well. There may be 2 or 3 in there that never populate on MLS because they're trying to do it on their own. And that way you can show them everything in that community. And then another thing that would help too is sometimes people say they want to wait 6 or 9 months, but if a house pops up in their email that they love, they may decide that they want to move forward much sooner, because they don't want to miss that house. So definitely set them up on an auto email and then just continue to check in with them periodically.
Okay.
Those were all really good questions. The last couple weeks have been really quiet, so I feel better that you guys are digging in and starting to get more active with your buyers and your leads. So again, if you have any questions, shoot me a text, give me a call. I'm happy to help. And I wish you all the best of luck. Hopefully you all have showings this weekend and into the end of the week. All right, take care.